Today's a great privilege to have a chat with Gail Surkan, who's a longstanding friend, and particularly in the life of the Rotary Club in Red Deer, which we both belong to for an extended period of time. So we do have a little bit in common civically, and particularly in our number of years that we've lived in Red Deer. So it's a pleasure to meet with you again, Gail, and to listen about some of your experiences in Red Deer, particularly for the period when you were mayor.
Always fun to talk about that. Almost ancient history now.
Yeah, it's beginning to feel that way when the question is how long, or who's the longest mayor of Red Deer. Mm-hmm. One of the top three, of course, was you. Well, perhaps we could go back and start with your life in Saskatchewan. I'm discovering that there are some very significant people in Red Deer whose roots and origins, including mine, go back to Saskatchewan. So perhaps we could start with your family life and a bit about how you grew up in Saskatchewan and went to university there and so on.
I did, like so many, grow up in Saskatchewan and then migrate to Alberta because Alberta had such outstanding opportunity at the time, right? So I grew up on the farm just outside of Regina. And I was fortunate enough to be close to Regina that I went to the city school system. So I kind of led a split urban-rural life, but really I think appreciated and gained a lot of the basic values in my life from growing up on the farm and working hard as part of a family farm. And then went to university. I actually spent my first year at McGill down east, and that was a bit of an awakening for a prairie kid off the farm in 1966, 67, when everything was breaking loose in Canada. You know, it was the year of the...
Well, it'd be our centennial year.
It was the year of the World's Fair in Montreal, and I was there. So anyway, then I came back and finished my education at the University of Saskatchewan. I met my husband there, Roger, in anthropology class.
So he's from Saskatchewan too?
He is from Saskatchewan. And, you know, he progressed, finished his law degree when I finished my degree. And then, like so many well-educated, hardworking Saskatchewan kids at the time, we picked up and, we worked in Saskatchewan for a few years. And then we moved to Alberta. We had a great opportunity for Roger to join a law firm there, and I had an opportunity to move my job with the federal government from Saskatchewan to Alberta.
Am I remember correctly, your background was in economics?
I got a Bachelor of Arts degree specializing in economics, and I went to work for the federal government as an economist back in the early years when they were hiring a lot of young professionals in those types of disciplines, and it wasn't something the civil service was really accustomed to, all these young people with brave new ideas. But I had a great run with the federal government, and they were very generous. I was negotiating federal provincial development agreements with the province on behalf of the federal government, and so they agreed that I could work from Alberta as well as I could work from Saskatchewan. So I was kind of an early remote worker. And we moved to Calgary. We lived there for a few years. And then when it came time to start a family, we looked for a smaller community, something where we could really put down roots as a family. And Red Deer was a really good choice for us. We moved in the late 70s, I think 1978. And, you know, Red Deer at the time, it was interesting. Red Deer was experiencing an influx of young professional people that were just starting to build their careers and their families and were attracted, by economic opportunity and lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So we came when a lot of other young people came that were building businesses and careers and never looked back. And so that romance with Red Deer has now lasted for 44 years.
I'm just as you're chatting, I'm thinking of how Mother and Dad came to Red Deer, and that would be 1940. But it was for essentially similar reasons. They were in Winnipeg, and Red Deer was actually, I think, in Dad's plan, was going to be a stepping stone to moving back to Calgary, which is where he was from. But he enjoyed Red Deer, and it fit him so well that he never left.
Yeah.
But what I remember growing up a little bit earlier than that is that Red Deer was an offshoot in some ways of Calgary and Edmonton. What happened in the big cities secondarily would happen in Red Deer, and I'm thinking particularly of economics and people coming and going, and the very high turnover rate of very good people in the banks and the RCMP and the government and so on. And they couldn't keep people to start some of the institutions that Red Deer was large enough to support, like the United Way. But the rationale is similar. Yeah. But what I love is, and you can see it through the Rotary Club too, people come here for their last job, and they end up loving it, enjoying it, and finding friends and staying.
I think we found lots of people like that, but we also found a lot of people that were young people like ourselves, just starting. They came to Red Deer thinking it was a place to get started on their career, maybe did think of it as a stepping stone, or weren't sure what they were really searching out. But when they got here, they really quickly became a part of the community, which is, I think, one of the things that's more possible in some ways in a smaller community than it is in the large metropolitan centers. And they put down roots and they stayed. So, in our group of friends, there are many that have that same story. Some of them came as professionals, doctors, so teachers, that kind of thing. Others came and started businesses, but they're still here. And they may not have ever intended to be here permanently. But the community, I think because of its location and because of its size, and because it tends and has tended over the years, I think, to really operate as a family-friendly community, has really attracted and kept people also. Young people have tended, as you've said, especially young people that have come and worked in the oil patch and with some of the institutions that made a corporate style out of moving people, have transitioned through Red Deer, but often they come back, or at least they really remember their time in Red Deer as being important and pivotal.
Well, in approaching this project and looking forward to these interviews, the one field that I really don't have any long-standing people to go to talk about is the oil and gas field. For the same reasons, people come and go. But I have this hidden feeling that there are some quite significant accomplishments by people in or from Red Deer in that field, and I haven't yet tapped into them. But I think of the Gunn family and who've made significant contributions to the industry and have been quite successful, and they're Red Deer based, and that's just a vacuum, a void in this project. So if you think of any,
well, I could share a few names with you because
that would be fabulous.
There are people that have built wonderful, strong businesses that have become an important part of our philanthropic community, that have become an important part of the industry, that have become an important part of kind of that entrepreneurial wisdom in the community. Some of them I know you would know right off the bat, but we'll talk about that because it has been an important part, a critical part of our economy. It's not the only part. We're also, fortunate enough to be a very strong agricultural service center, and in many ways a service center for the entire slice of central Alberta and in all of its facets. So it's not that we are entirely an oil and gas town, But that's been an important part of our personality here in Red Deer, for sure.
Well, I mean, you're quite accurate, particularly in the healthcare field where the hospital has become a referral center now, much more so than just a municipal hospital in years past.
Yeah.
So that, there have been major changes, not just because of growth, but because of, I believe, because of the competence of the people who've come and stayed. Can we go back to your life, perhaps when the family was starting to grow up or give you the free time, but you got involved in Red Deer civic politics, and what led you to doing that?
Well, I think like a lot of things, it's not something that you necessarily start out with the intention of doing, and I certainly didn't. It wasn't even on my radar. But one of the really strong characteristics of Red Deer, which we grew to love and support, was its sense of volunteerism. Interestingly enough, when we came, I was surprised to find out, for example, that all of our recreation programs, our extension programs, the things that were run in the rec centers and in the neighborhoods, were done by volunteers entirely, which was an uncommon model. Most places that wasn't true. So many of the service organizations were very strong and very influential, and that whole sense of volunteerism was a part of the ethic. So I had 3 little kids at home, all under the age of 4, and I really looked, because I'd been working for a period of time, I needed an outlet outside the home, so I became involved as a volunteer with the Chamber of Commerce. And one of the first things that I worked on, and I think in a number of, also with a number of the city committees, so I would give them, that I think gave me a bit of background in some of the city work that I became interested in. But long story short, if you become a volunteer in Red Deer, it's a slippery slope, right? You can quickly become more involved in Red Deer, and that's what happened to me.
That's the reward.
It is the reward in many ways. So I worked with the Chamber of Commerce on downtown business development. I was active with our Pines Community Association here in the neighborhood when Waskesiu Park was being built and designed, and we became quite involved as a neighborhood in helping shape the plan of the park as it is adjacent to our neighborhood here. So, a number of experiences like that. I worked on various committees as a volunteer with the city. And, sooner or later, people start to see you cropping up in these different places, and somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, well, why don't you, take a run at it? So I ran for council, and that was 1986. It was, it was a great outlet for me. I had, a real interest in the community. I had a background in economic development. I was learning a lot about community development. I'd been kind of down in the trenches on a couple of projects, and so it was just a natural step for me to be interested in council. I spent 6 years on council. It was a great experience, worked with great people, really came to appreciate the city as an organization and how committed the city staff were to what they were doing. And also began to recognize some of the complexities and problems and challenges that were confronting any community at that time. And then when Bob McGee, also a long-serving mayor, he and I think, share that distinction. When he decided to retire, then I threw my hat in the ring. And that was the beginning of another chapter, for me, a really fulfilling chapter of involvement in the community.
What can you remember some of the features of Red Deer at that time as you became mayor? The size of the city, the size of the staff at City Hall and so on, just so that we have a bit of an understanding of some of the challenges that you would have faced too.
It was. I think the city was probably approaching 60,000 people in terms of population. But as always, and what you realize with Red Deer quickly, is that it's not just the population in the city, that there's a much larger region, and in many ways, the complexity of the job reflects that, right? You really operate as the center of a bigger region. I don't remember the details about city staff. I know at the time, there would have been, I'm going to guess, maybe, 400 or 450 city staff, something like that. That's a guess. We had a significant budget at that time. One of the things I learned early in the game, which gave me an appreciation for just how much business the city did, is that we had 18 different lines of business. So when you think about it, there were departments managing infrastructure, managing water and sewer. We had our own electricity company. There were completely different departments that were managing the programs and recreation and in sort of social development in the community. There were completely different programs that had to do with just managing the financial side of the city. So when you think about 18 different lines of businesses, there aren't too many businesses of that scale that are that complicated and complex. All of them with very fine people in them, led by people that were really committed to what they were doing. So I learned a tremendous amount. I had a big learning curve, and I think that's very true of people that join city government. They quickly learn it's not simple. And it is very grassroots, because people have a vested interest in everything you're doing, and they'll give you lots of feedback, which is good. So what I loved about the city at the time, which I still love about the city, is that it was, I think it was very clear what the values were in the community. People here they value family life. They value safety, particularly safe neighborhoods, because it's a family-oriented community. They value outdoors and their setting. They particularly love our River Valley setting, and people here place a lot of priority on being able to enjoy and preserve and use that setting. So those things, what made it, I'm not going to say it made it easy, but it certainly helped shape how the city approached its priorities, was the fact that the community was very clear on what its priorities were. So if you stayed inside that set of values, then by and large the community felt you were headed in the right direction. I loved the fact that we still had a very strong volunteer orientation, and we could work with the community. We could pull the community together around things that needed to get done. So I think it's fair to say the community we went through strong growth periods, and we went through periods which were very challenging economically also during that time. But through all of that, the community still operated with those clear priorities, still had a sense of identity, I think, a sense of place, and had a growing appreciation of the important role that Red Deer played in central Alberta. And we spent quite a bit of time during the years that I was mayor building up those relationships in the region, because central Alberta, I think, had been maybe a little overlooked. I think people had, and I'm going to say people in provincial government, for example, looked at Alberta as the two metropolitan areas, Calgary and Edmonton, and then kind of a bunch of smaller mid-sized cities, and nothing of particular. I think the rest of it, by and large, the provincial government thought was just rural. And I don't think Red Deer ever thought of itself exclusively as rural. We were a growing, healthy, complicated in some ways, mid-sized city in between two large metropolitan areas, with a very strong relationship with our central Alberta region. So we spent time talking about the central Alberta region as a region that could work together, as a region that could develop more influence and profile. And those were fun projects for me. I liked that. I liked that collaborative approach.
I remember when we sat on committee to look at the concept of a crossing or developing the crossing site.
Yeah.
And what really struck me was the name of your company at the time, called the Company of Adventurers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, this is a lady who understands a bit of history,
Yeah.
as well as the intent of just that phrase. What were some of the challenges that you faced or thought you could and needed to face as you became the mayor? Were there some specific ones that the city faced, either financially or functionally?
I think there were from time to time some financial challenges. I think at the time I became mayor, we were drawing down our reserves. And so in other words, I think we were finding it challenging to actually afford the kinds of infrastructure and the kinds of programs that the community needed at the time. So, I think we had to get very realistic about doing some financial planning and trying to plan out into the future a bit longer to really understand some of the major capital projects that needed to be completed, some of the major pieces of infrastructure that we needed, to look at the sustainability of different programs that we're running, and to try and map out how we might get there financially. It varied a lot because we were a cyclical economy, as Alberta has always been, and some years would be really tight and hard, and other years would be a little bit more generous. And the provincial government at the time provided some funding to municipalities, but it came and went with those cycles, and so it was challenging to have a really good long-term financial plan. Also, we were, in many of those years, a very strong growth community. We were growing, and it was really hard to keep up to the capital that was needed, whether that was a bridge across the river or better recreation facilities or the development and operation of the Waskesiu Park system, all of those kinds of things. They were big, important projects that were important for the future of the community, but they were big bites financially. So planning those and understanding, how we were going to save the money or develop the financial wherewithal to get those built, those were important challenges. And for me, a lot of it had to do with not just building to what we were, but creating a bit of a bench, a strong kind of infrastructure base that the community could grow with, because we obviously, because of our location and because of the inherent strength of the economy most of the time, we were going to be a growing community. We weren't a retirement community, we weren't a sleepy little backwater. We were a growing community, really benefiting in large part from our position on Highway 2 between Calgary and Edmonton, and as the center of a strong central Alberta region, which was, for the most part, was prosperous. So, getting that basic infrastructure in place was important. And the other thing that was important to me is that we'd have really good relationships with those around us that we had to work with. So, from time to time, the city had a very strained relationship with the county. And every time the city needed to grow, they were growing into the county space, and there was, cause for angst around that. So we developed the first real intermunicipal development plan that helped us come to grips, form a really strong relationship with the county, understand where the county wanted to go and the city wanted to go over a longer period of time, and work out a way of managing that. And that's been the foundation, I think, of that relationship for a long time now. We also built organizations like the Central Alberta Economic Partnership, which is a partnership of all of the great majority of the communities in Central Alberta working together on economic development, so that we weren't regarded as just part of, sort of the hinterland of Calgary and Edmonton, that instead we were thought of and could profile ourselves as a strong, interconnected region that knew how to cooperate, knew how to get things done together, whether or not that was promoting ourselves economically or appreciating, shared infrastructure or whatever it was. And I think those kinds of relationships have grown into things like being able to build common water and sewer systems with surrounding communities and do some of the things that just make so much sense. But if you're thinking of the surrounding communities as your competitors, those kinds of things don't happen. So we spent lots of time building those relationships and talking about what we could do together. It was important for me. I like that style of work.
As you look back on it, there are highlights and lowlights as always, especially if the community is cycling economically and for reasons that it can't control necessarily. But as you look back on it, what do you reflect on as some of your significant accomplishments?
Well, in many ways, they are the kinds of things I've just talked about. So, there are the things you can touch and feel. Like we built the Collicutt Center during the time I was mayor, and I was very proud of that. It was something, there was controversy in the community. Not everybody felt that we should invest that much money in a facility. Not everyone felt that it would be broadly used in the community, and yet I think now no one in the community would give it up. It's an important model. It's an important reflection of how we value recreation and physical activity in the community.
Despite the cost at the time and the controversy around it, it would be viewed as very inexpensive now.
Well, exactly right. We built a number of those kinds of things because, again, the community needed to get that solid base of infrastructure underneath it so that it could grow from that. But in the end, I think some of the things that I'm most proud of are maybe a little bit less tangible. And that has a lot to do with building good relationships, both within the community. So we did, for example, we did common projects between the city and the Chamber of Commerce and the college and the county, pulled together, built common programs, found a way of not just working together, but of profiling the community as a highly collaborative community. We built a good relationship with the county and signed the first or second intermunicipal development plan in the province. We built good relationships across central Alberta and built an economic partnership, which is still functioning. So what is that, 20 some odd years later, right? So I think those kinds of things were important to me. It was important for me to reinforce the values in the community that people already felt strongly about. So protecting the river valley, building good recreational infrastructure, building safe neighborhoods, being always ready to collaborate and do it together. So one of the things that's interesting about the Collicutt Center, for example, is that was built with the cooperation of some of the sport clubs and the financial contributions of some of the important sporting clubs in the community. It was a new model, hadn't been done before, but hockey and the gymnastics club and others. We had an arrangement with the soccer club as well to share some responsibilities. Came into a collaborative project, a single united project to help get that done. It might not have happened otherwise, or it wouldn't have happened at the scale that is there in the building now. So in part, what we got from that was that great building and the programs that are in it. But the other thing we got is that we got a real strong sense of how this community can pull together to get stuff done when it needs to get done. I think of that as an important part, a critical part of our personality. And when you have projects like that, it flexes that muscle and keeps that muscle strong.
Have you had other communities come to you to look at how you structured it, what's in it, how you set up the model?
We have,
as a precedent in the province?
Over time, I think yes, different. And what was happening at the time is that most communities of our size were recognizing that those kind of multiplex units were important in mid-sized cities. And so there was a whole series of them built during those years. And everybody was looking at everybody else to see how it would get done. We, in fact, even ourselves, when we were looking at the Collicutt Centre, looked at centres in British Columbia that had been completed in other places. So everybody kind of drew from everyone else's experience. Not necessarily every community had that capacity, more precedent on working together in those ways. So I don't know that a lot of others followed the same model, but for us it was very reflective of our community. And it harkened back to something even much more historical, and that was the fact that we had the first community school built in Canada, one of the first in Canada, I think, certainly the first in Alberta, that was built.
That's the Daw Centre.
The Daw Centre. Yeah. And it was the cooperation of the public school system, the Catholic school system, and the city working together to build a common facility. Hadn't been done. Many thought it couldn't be done, that there just wasn't a way to build that relationship and operate together on a long-term basis. But in Red Deer, that was doable. Mm-hmm. And that became, I think, a model and a part of our personality here in this community, a part of our value system. We do that stuff, right? And we do it together.
I'm just delighted to see the expansion that's going on again, mm-hmm. which takes the basic model and is adding to it in terms of what the community needs and so on. But, with forethought, there was space there. And there was eventually a need from a growing community.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not sure where the source was, but I have heard secondarily how pleased Harold Daw was to be able to put that together and join the two school systems under one roof.
Yeah, I think there were a few leaders involved in that, people that understood that it might be challenging because these three partners weren't they each had their own separate areas of responsibility and hadn't operated together as partners before, so it was an unusual idea. But there was that kind of leadership in the community that saw the possibilities and put their shoulder to the wheel and got it done, and it became a model of collaboration that we see echoed, I think, still in the community, but it got echoed again during the years I was the mayor in the Collicutt Centre. So rather than seeing that as being, the Collicutt Centre as being exclusively a city project, it became a true community-based project. Mm-hmm. And organizations stepped up, not just with their, willingness to help out and participate in the planning. They stepped up with their money. And so the scale of the building, the scale of the programs it can handle, the quality of the build, that all had to do with it being a shared effort.
It's I guess an aside, but several of us have just finished a new book on, we've entitled it Pathways to Education in Red Deer. And it's on the early schools and school systems in Red Deer. And right. To my amazement, with a community of 2,500, there were 8 new schools started in Red Deer. There's only 2 systems now, but in the early years, Red Deer was a mecca, partly because of its location on the railway, for education and educational precedence in the province. Mm-hmm. And it's just, in that way, I was able to incorporate comments like, the Daw Centre and how it has grown. Yeah. Gail, can we go back at, it's now, I guess, history on your part, but what were, if those are some of the pertinent thoughts about your time as mayor, what did you do afterwards? You certainly were very well known and still are, and very respected in the community for not just your time as mayor, but your contributions to the community. But what did you do afterwards?
Well, Roger and I have had a very nice retirement.
I did an envious one.
And I didn't like so many people of our age. We decided we wanted to change the pace of our lives and have a little bit more free time. So, I left the mayor's position, and Roger, really shut a good part of his business down. He didn't shut it down entirely. And we continued to do a few things. I did a lot of board work. I was at one time sitting on 5 or 6 different boards, and, Roger was working, sort of on a scaled down version in his practice. So we had a few years like that, and it gave us a little bit more flexibility in our time. I did some consulting. Those years were good too. It allowed us, I think, to gradually kind of decompress a bit. And our family, the kids were all either going through their post-secondary or finished their post-secondary. So those were good years. And then we transitioned again, and, I'm only on one board now, and he completely shut down his practice after a few years. And since then we've traveled and enjoyed participating in the community on a little bit more manageable basis, I'm going to say, or a little more selective basis. So it's been those years have been very good for us too, because we've got lots of different appetites and interests, and travel is certainly a big part of it, and we've done a lot of that now. So we're still doing it, and that's kind of the phase we're in now. We're still healthy, and the kids are out and on their own, and we've got 7 grandchildren that we love and enjoy spending time with when we can. So we've been very fortunate, I think, all of the time still in Red Deer, never questioning whether or not we wanted to stay, because for us, this community is such a part of who we are, and our circle of friends, and the people that we know and enjoy spending time with. So I'm not at Rotary as often as I should be, because I'm often away, but things like Rotary is still an important part of my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, you come back and tell us of the last exciting episode to your life. You're kind of reminding me of my mother used to use age as a benchmark, and when she did a significant one, she said, well, I have to pick up a new skill. Mm-hmm. And whether yours was sailing or somewhere in the world or traveling, she picked up, we all distinctly remember, she picked up rollerblading.
Oh, wow.
And the classic picture of Mother now is with elbow pads and whatever, but it's that concept. If you have good health, you can do it. Don't lose the enthusiasm. Don't lose the vision, because you only have one chance at it.
Well, that's right, and we are still healthy, and, I think that's very fortunate, because, that there's likelihood that there'll be some liability that'll crop up in the next few years. So as the time, for this time, we're still active and out and about. We do enjoy sailing a lot. We sail internationally somewhere every couple of years. Have really enjoyed that. It's taken us into parts of the world we might not have explored otherwise.
Well, you're, to me, one of the finest examples of that kind of motivating expression, make today count. Mm-hmm. And you and Roger have certainly done that. And the nice thing is you get to come back and, I guess, share it with the rest of us at Rotary, or in our conversations with each other. I know you've touched on it a few times, Gail, but is there anything else you'd like to add about your family? I know you've made some comments about the one son you have is it the Air Force segment of the Armed Services? Because he, I think, was stationed at Cold Lake for many years. Mm-hmm. Was there anything you would like to add about your family and raising it in Red Deer, or that you haven't already commented on?
Well, we're proud of those 3 kids, and they've each been raised and educated in Red Deer, and are still very appreciative of growing up in Red Deer during those years when it gave them a very strong understanding of what it is to grow up in a family-oriented environment where you've got access to good recreation facilities, good education. They've all benefited from that. So yes, our son is, he actually now commands a squadron, a fighter squadron up in Cold Lake for the Canadian Air Force, Royal Canadian Air Force.
It was. Yes, I was a member.
Yeah, and you know, both of our girls are involved in the education system up in Sherwood Park in St. Albert. So one of them runs the fitness and wellness program for a large high school in Edmonton, and the other is a teacher in, well, I was going to say in elementary school, but now she's teaching junior high. So she's raised 3 of her own through the junior high stage. That'll give her a good start on
Yes,
understanding what it is to teach middle school. So, you know, they've all struck out from that foundation in Red Deer, and they're all dyed-in-the-wool Albertans. Nobody talks about moving on or moving elsewhere, and that's good to see too. You know, I think they all have a real appreciation for the very many advantages we have when we live in Alberta. So, you know.
Well, as you're commenting, I can't help but identify with your comments, having, you know, grown up in Red Deer as well, and reflect back on how long those characteristics have existed in the educational system in Red Deer. It was a terribly unique school system, the semester system, and so on. And I guess from a personal point of view, allowed my twin brother and I to graduate from grade 12 and only write one final examination on a ship going down the St. Lawrence River in French.
Really?
And that's how we finished our high school compliments of the Red Deer system.
Wow. No, I didn't know that story.
It was unusual and I would say exciting. Our preceptor was fluent in many languages and gave us a good estimation of our marks before we left the ship. So we were unusually fortunate. But it's just another reflection of one of the major qualities that tend not to get recognized, perhaps as such, in Red Deer, and because of the quality of the people who are in it, and the people who've stayed with it and helped some of the institutions grow.
Mm-hmm. And models some different styles of education. One of the things that our 3 children really benefited from is that they walked to school every day to one of the early community schools. The Pines Community School, which is here in our neighborhood, was one of the very early models of community schools, which were built with the idea that the community, the neighborhood itself, could come into the school, could use the facilities, could, you know, share and program in that infrastructure. Very unusual model, again, piloted and prototyped in Red Deer, and then copied elsewhere. And, you know, our kids, as a result, you know, walked to that building every day, walked home for lunch, and, you know, felt very safe, felt very supported, and were educated and grew up in a neighborhood which was really knitted together around that school. A very early model, which, you know, it's not necessarily true now. And for real practical reasons, I think the school systems, you know, have to bus a lot of kids and so on. But ours benefited from that early sort of, I call it social entrepreneurialism. Those kinds of things that got piloted in Red Deer or prototyped here that weren't common and hadn't been done elsewhere, but were entirely founded on the ability of the community to work together and to share different spaces and different responsibilities.
Well, that's a lovely note to end our delightful chat about Red Deer and your involvement and your time, and, you know, with Roger and your family in Red Deer. And so many of the things you've said just bring such a bell. As I think back to my good fortune to be able to grow up in Red Deer and enjoy some of the things that we don't recognize that we're enjoying, and how lucky we are when it's happening. It just seems natural.
it's fun to go back and remember and be reminded of all of those things, isn't it, Bob? I agree.
It so is. It truly is.
Yeah.
It's just been a delight. Thank you very much, Gail. Thank you for setting the time aside to have this enjoyable chat.
Well, thank you for including me.
Yeah, well, Saskatchewan's had a very major impact on Alberta. I'm learning more and more of it as I enjoy meeting some of the long-standing Red Deer people.
Yeah.
It only had a population of 2,500 when we were born in Red Deer. It's hard to think of Red Deer only existing in the valley,
Yeah.
which was Red Deer. And if you lived outside the valley, it meant that you were there because the taxes were lower.
Yeah.
It's changed dramatically.
Well, and then that outside, it was kind of the escarpment when the veterans came back from the war, and those veterans parcels were developed, right? Am I right about
Yes,
that?
in Mount View, and we
Yeah.
used to
So we started to
deliver
grow up the
newspapers
hills,
up
yeah,
there.
as
Sunnybrook, and
yeah,
yeah,
after the war.
our home was one of the first new ones outside the valley.
Yeah,
That's another story.
that's another story.
Yeah, it is. Anyway,
Okay.
just a delight, Gail. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.